Hi, I'm Celeste.
And I'm Silvana.
Welcome to the Lift program. Today we are going to be talking about
The pelvis.
the pelvis. So we're going to give a general overview of the pelvis. We're not going to be super specific about the anatomy, the muscles, etc. It's a general overview for people using this program to kind of understand the basics of what we're talking about in the work, and then for the deeper information we do have all of the anatomical specificity, and that is written in our overall program in the documentation that we have available in the program.
Perfect. So we're gonna just name the bones, some of the ligaments, the muscles that are quite important for us, but we're not gonna name them all. The fascia, of course, and the organs. So before we start that, we wanna say something about the position of the pelvis. So
absolutely. So we'll take a full view of the pelvis all the way around. This is actually the back of the pelvis. This is the side. These would be like the hip bones that people refer to. And this is the front. This is the bowl. So before we talk about the basic bones of the pelvis, we think commonly that when a pelvis is in its anatomical position, it's like this. However, that is not the case. It's not straight up and down, right? So go for it, Silvana. Tilt the pelvis.
So I'm just going to tilt it because I think it's sometimes easier to understand that sometimes when we sit on the sit bones, we kind of imagine that when we're standing, it's like a ball sitting on the floor or on the mat, and that's the position of the pelvis when we stand, which is actually not very right. No, we actually have a tilt of the pelvis, an anterior tilt.
Yes, to the front. So it's an anterior tilt to the front.
So just to make sure, this is the back of the pelvis. So if I'm going to turn it to the side, you actually can see that it's not in this position, that we're having our pelvis slightly tilt forward. And of course, just try to imagine that you have hip bones coming from the sides, and this is the natural way of the pelvis.
Right. So this is important. And actually, when it comes to low back pain and hip pain, a lot of times the problems arise when the pelvis is moving in this direction too much, sitting in this direction too much, standing in this direction too much, because it's out of its natural alignment. So it's important to just note naturally, when we say get on the sitting bones, you can't get on them back here. You have to get on them a little bit up and forward so that you can really feel that underneath. So to the bones themselves, right? This just represents the spine, but we have the ischium, which are underneath, right? So they're actually going to be...
I'm just going to take our nice organs out, and we're going to talk about them later on, so they're going to be waiting for us here.
So these blue and red items are muscles and ligaments. So the bones, the ischium, are right under here. So these are the actual sitting bones.
We stayed on that, Yeah,
this is where we want to be sitting. So then we have the big bones on the side, which these are the ilium bones, and these are the major bones of our hips.
And when we're upset, all of the time we put our arms on that crest of the ilium. So that would be those bones. Sometimes people think of them like ears of an elephant.
The ears of an elephant.
I don't know. That's your imagination. I kind of like it, but.
And then we have these points at the front and back of the hip bones. So this is it's the anterior superior iliac spine, but we're not going to do a lot of that type of talk. But this front bone and the back bone together, if I'm going to put my fingers on both of them, when we're in the alignment that the pelvis is supposed to be in, they should be running on a plane, a horizontal plane. So if the pelvis is too far back or too far forward, that's not going to maintain itself. So that's a nice bone reference for you when you're laying on the mat or standing up, of something that you can actually feel on yourself. So you can feel your front bones and your back bones. These you can touch, and you can say, where am I today? And
you will see in our programs a lot of time we will rock the pelvis. Sometimes when it's off alignment, that will help just get it right back to the natural way it's supposed to be.
Right, so back to the bones, we've got the sacrum and the coccyx on the back. So sacrum and then the coccyx is at the bottom,
Yeah.
right? At the
Just
base.
move
There
some
we go.
ligaments
Yeah, there
here.
we go. Coccyx at the bottom, and the sacrum is up in here, attached actually to the hip bones. And then in the front we have the pubis, the symphysis pubis.
Yeah, sometimes people have pain here,
Yep.
especially pregnant women or some athlete too,
Yes.
and that would be the joint.
That
here.
is, yeah, the joint between, because this is
Mhm.
actually two pieces that
Yeah.
that acts as a joint. So it's kind of important to note, and you can see the spine and the disc. So when there is low back pain and when there is hip pain,
Something is happening.
something is going on, and oftentimes the pelvic floor is a part of that. And doing exercises for the pelvic floor, even if you don't have anything specific to the pelvic floor, will actually help those things
Yeah.
too.
And I just want to mention another thing. You were talking about the coccyx here. So some people have pain here when they sit
Yeah.
or they try to move from sitting to standing. This would definitely be an issue of the pelvic floor, and therefore if you have any pain in this area of the coccyx, that then you definitely need to do our exercise program and even maybe see a specialist about
Absolutely,
that. Yeah.
absolutely. That way you can identify. So we always say getting a diagnosis is
It's
really
good.
important. So if you go to a healthcare provider and you're able to get a diagnosis, then you can look to one of the specialty programs that we offer for either incontinence or constipation or prolapse or
Yeah.
something like that. Or you can do the full program, but it helps to have a diagnosis so that you can be a little more specific in your personal addressing of that. And something else, now that we talked basically to the bones, is to just, as we look at this whole thing, to know that there are tissues above and below,
Yes.
and these are muscles and connective tissues, fascia, ligaments, tendons, etc., and they all play together. So this
Yes.
pelvis is part of the center of our body and part of our place of balance in
Yes.
the core and in the body and standing, etc. But we need to realize that as much as we address it itself, we need to be aware that the things above it and below it, all the way to our feet and all the way to the crown of our head, are actually related.
Yes. Sometimes problems that can feel like a pelvis issue or a hip issue have other reasons that we maybe need to explore more.
Yes.
So we was just talking about the bones, and now we want to say something about the muscles
Yes.
and the ligaments or the soft tissue.
Yes.
And we're going to turn it.
Yeah,
Yes.
so you can see this way. And it's actually really, really interesting to look at the inside of the pelvis, and this essentially is the pelvic floor. So all of this red stuff inside that you see really represents the muscles of the pelvic floor, and they are designed in a hammock form.
Yeah, so
It's kind of like a basket weave.
So the term floor is kind of not very accurate, since the floor is flat, and the pelvic floor is definitely not flat and should not be flat.
Right, right. It's not flat at all, actually. It's in the shape that you can see, and the tissues are running in multiple directions.
Yeah.
So all of the muscle tissues are actually weaved together in this big hammock that supports,
the organs,
and everything else through this bony structure. And just to make a separate point from a connective tissue standpoint, the base of your feet has a direct relationship to your pelvic floor, as well as to your diaphragm, as well as up into the palate of your mouth. So there is...
Sometimes people refer that as the diaphragms of the body, and that's not only the breathing one, it's the pelvic floor, it's the arch of the foot.
Yes.
So sometimes you can hear people discussing the pelvic floor and calling it a diaphragm also.
Right, they might say a pelvic diaphragm, exactly. So you can see the way the muscle tissues are aligned. We're not going to talk right now to each of them, but we do go into more specific content in our written material. It's important to note that everything in this system, we'll turn it this way too, just to see the underside, right? And this is
It would be the rectum,
Yes.
of course. That would be
I was going to say female. This is a female
pelvis.
This is a female pelvis. So
pelvis,
that's kind of why I paused, just to identify the anatomy of the pelvis.
And so when we have children, it's from here, and of course when we go to the bathroom, when we pee, it's from this small hole in the front, actually.
Right, but all of this is still part of the pelvic floor. So everything that is in red is the musculature of the pelvic floor. And then we've got all of the attachments that play a part. So
I'm just going to turn it to the side so you can just see. This is actually the socket where the hip would go. So you can see that everything will be deeply connected to the pelvis. So the muscles also have to do with that.
So when someone's hip or leg is able to turn out externally, rotate or turn in, or wherever it's positioned and its range of motion, and the muscles that attach around the back and around the front and on the inside, all of that actually impacts pelvic floor function and health. So the exercise programs that we do address the functional movement of the limbs in relation to the pelvis so that everything is working optimally.
Yes, so I would say that the three main things that we want to mention again, and we already said that the pelvic floor is not a floor, it's a hammock.
Yes.
It's not flat. We have a weave kind of structure to the muscle that gives more power to it, and then the layers. So actually very smart. Evolution did a good job with this, I think. So yay evolution.
Yes,
Thank
yay
you.
evolution.
Yeah. And now you want to say something about the control. And
so essentially all of the muscles are under the control of a particular nerve. So this is the pudendum nerve.
Yes.
And it's something that we have to keep in mind that we cannot
isolate
think of just isolating an area. Just one area. If we isolate this area, we're going to improve everything. We need to think of the whole picture and then consider that particular area that may be more or less weak, but realize that in isolation cannot change anything. That it has to be looking at the whole with maybe a little emphasis on that area. But
so a lot of times we can just, let's say, divide the work of the muscles of the pelvic floor in a global kind of way. That would be not mentioning. One example would be standing on one leg.
Right.
Okay, that will definitely get the pelvic floor to work. But then we have some very deep work, more of awareness.
Right, where we're talking about contractions, and with reference to that awareness, it's important to. I'm going to flip the pelvis this way, just so everybody can see this. So we might give some cues to think of bringing these points together. So this is like an east-west plane of motion if you're thinking about poles. So we have the north and the south pole and the east and the west pole. And a lot of times we're going to be thinking of these 2 points on the poles trying to come together. And the same thing from the bottom and the top, or the back and the front, trying to come together. So we want to be able to get this type of action, and we find that specifically getting the points from these posterior sides coming together in this east-west pole helps with activating the significant musculature to improve, specifically like incontinence or a problem like that. That is the connection that is ideal. Although there is sometimes weakness on the top to bottom that we want to work as well. So we can think of it as poles, and sometimes we use subtle imagery and imaging to try to make these connections, and we're trying to develop awareness. And sometimes you might have no awareness of your pelvic floor. Even if we're talking about it, you'll be like, what the heck are they talking about? I can't feel that. It means nothing to me. Eventually you will start to have that awareness through practice. But
it's sometimes research shows that even when we talk about the pelvic floor and we don't really know where is it, how to contract it, sometimes referring to the anus and working that way, it's easier in the beginning.
To just say to kind of contract, to contract around your anal area.
So sometimes that will be an easier way before everybody knows exactly what they're doing. That would be a good cueing in the beginning.
It's a start. And then more specifically, you're going to be thinking of like the 2 ischium, those 2 bottom bones kind of coming together from the back. And that's more than just contracting at the anal area. Also, just to go back to what Silvana said, the function of the pelvic floor, it should be active and working in our day-to-day life. So when there's a dysfunction, it's related to something larger, and always. And a lot of the exercises that we give are global movement exercises that we don't have to talk about it, like she said, because we want just natural movements to start regaining the natural way that that the area should function. And then we layer that with specificity and some specific detailed contractions and work, so that way you're getting both ends of the function.
And another thing, breathing is very, very important here. And there's a synergy between our pelvic floor and our breathing. And of course, when our breathing is not very good, we may have some issues with the pelvic floor. And we do say a lot about that in our program. And we have some even special balloon work and other things that we do with or without any kind of accessories.
Of a prop, So it's identifying also where our own breath patterns are. And very frequently, the breathing is really stuck up in here for most people, where we're not fully using the capacity of our diaphragm, and therefore the pelvic diaphragm or the pelvic floor is not able to work in sync with the actual diaphragm.
And I would also have to say that sometimes athletes, which are very strong, do not have the ability to release.
Right, because they're over tense through their diaphragm, and it's very easy to be very tightly contracted in there as an athlete. So learning how to soften a little bit and
to release
and to relax, and in terms of the best way for managing the pelvic floor itself is by looking at both tension and release patterns.
That's a balance that it's not very easy to find sometimes.
Yes, and as an individual, there's no one answer, because everybody has a different relationship of that tension and release. And some people, at least many athletes, are over tight. Some are actually over lax. There's too much laxity. And that happens in other individuals as well. So it's trying to bring both of those ends of the spectrum into synergy and into balance.
So this is like a model of a female pelvis, but whatever we just talked about is for men too.
Yes.
But we want to talk some more about the female.
Yes, specifically, because there's an issue that happens for women, prolapse, that deals with the organs of the uterus and the organs of the bladder, or organs being bladder and uterus.
So we're just going to take our nice organs here. So actually inside I'm not sure we can show it because it's going to be too small to see, but I'm just going to try to put them inside the pelvis, and hopefully you'll be able to see. So the anus, of course, is the further back.
Yes, so that's the rectum.
So this is the back of the pelvis. So that would be the
rectum,
the last one. Then we will have our, only women have uterus. Yes, men don't have them yet. Okay, and that would be the second one. I don't know if you
try to just layer them.
I'm not sure. Maybe I'm gonna do it outside there, and the front one will be
bladder.
So it will go just below here. So this is the way it's layered inside, but I'm gonna take it out so I can explain it a bit better. So I'm just gonna put this aside for a second, and try to imagine that this is the inside of the pelvis, and then this is the bladder. This is front, this is back, and this is actually above of it will be the uterus. So we can understand maybe better now why sometimes when the ligament and everything is on, let's say, a prolapse or some other issues, it would be pressuring on, it would have pressure, like physical pressure on the bladder, and that would cause a lot of issues. And of course that we want to have them sitting one above the other nicely, not pressuring down,
squishing
not squishing. So that would be a lot of muscle that we need to strengthen, and of course ligaments is another issue.
Right, so the ligament aspect is something that we can't address
Fix.
the same way, right? Because we can take muscles and we can ask muscles to contract and release, and if they're too tense to relax, and if they're too relaxed to get stronger and to learn how to tense. So we can do that with the muscle tissues, but the ligaments, if there's a problem with the ligaments, that's much harder to address. So it doesn't mean that you can't help yourself.
You always can.
Right,
Well,
so the muscles have a lot of power.
And in overall working out, doing exercise,
Yeah.
it's a benefit anyway. So that's a good thing. And I think that's it.
I think that's it. Please send us any questions or thoughts, and we can direct you to more information that we have on our site, or we could do another talk of any sort that you are interested in.
So I hope you enjoyed our pelvic stuff.
Yes, a little pelvic story.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Bye.